topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello, and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach, an emotional wisdom training specialist, and a longtime diversity educator. Today, the show is called Veterans Deserve Better Care, about post-life adjustment and recovery, ideally. And we have 4 veterans who have done tremendous service for all of us, to whom I'm totally grateful. There are so many sacrifices that happen that we do not even know about if we haven't been in their shoes, and I haven't been in their shoes. And I'm so grateful, as I think we all should feel. And I want to do more than just thank our veterans. This year we have some wonderful people returning, and I would like to start by mentioning, when we did this show last year to honor veterans, I dedicated the show in loving memory to my cousin Bobby. And before I tell you how he actually lost his life, I want you to know what he did. I also want to dedicate it to anyone else who has lost a family member who was sacrificing their life for the rest of us and for our country. Bobby served in Vietnam for 18 months, and he flew helicopters, UH-1H helicopters. He was a pilot, and he had the extremely difficult job of transporting and extracting Vietnamese and US troops in and out of hot landing zones. He had tremendous courage, as he had to hover while taking heavy enemy fire. And Bobby won the Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 Bronze Stars for Valor, and 2 Air Medals for Valor. And our guest last year really supported the program by saying how Bobby died. And since we're talking about post-service support, they showed me to name it. He ended up taking his life after returning to the United States after service. And we know that's true for far too many people. Let me now bring on our guests. I want to start with Bobby's nephew, Richard Cassem II, who served 24 years in the U.S. Army and retired as Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cassem, retired as an infantry officer in the Middle East and North Africa as an area officer. His last assignment was Arabian Peninsula Division Chief for Joint Staff. And in that capacity, he was advisor to the chairman of the Joint Staff. Richard, thank you for coming. Welcome to the show again. And Michelle Bailey joined the U.S. Army in 1994, and she also was a pilot of helicopters. And she spent 8 years in the service between the 2 Gulf Wars. And I'm going to ask Mona Pearl Treball to please add to her introduction. She has so many degrees and has dedicated years to developing curriculum to train nurses on how to treat returned soldiers, our veterans, because she is a veteran. She served in the U.S. Air Force for 22 years. And she has developed curriculums for a university that hopefully will become national curriculums. And this is such a critical specialty area. Mona, thank you so much for being here. And please add to you, you have so many degrees. Please add what you want our audience to know.
Well, I just want you to know that as serving in 22 years, it was everything from the battlefield to the Pentagon. And my last assignments were as the medical director for the Air Force Reserve, and then as a special assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force, and really getting a whole perspective from the battlefield to where we make policy in order to help and support our troops. And at the same time, I was also a family member where my former husband had been on the front line, deployed about 20 something times, and had really bad PTSD, came home and broke up the family, had the family perspective. And then I had 3 cancers while in service. And, from that, I really got the patient perspective. And that really led me to helping to create these graduate degrees, totally focused on veteran and military healthcare. Thanks for having us, Bahi. I really appreciate it and the work you're doing.
Well, thank you very much. I wanted to start with Rich sharing just to share more about what it was you did while you're serving. I know it was an array of things, but I think it's good for citizens who have not taken this role to get a more clear idea of what it is that you're dedicating your time to.
Certainly. And first, let me say thank you, Bia, for having me back on again after a year. I enjoyed our broadcast last year, and once again, my father says hello. So I joined the Army as an infantry officer in 1994. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant of infantry. And so I did various types of anti-armor infantry, light infantry, mechanized infantry. I was a basic training company commander for a while. And then eventually I made the transition to my functional area, which is foreign area officer. So I still wear the infantry brass on my uniform, but I spent the second half of my career doing more diplomatic and cultural awareness type activities. So I say diplomatic, although one of my assignments was as a FAO was in combat as an advisor to a brigade commander. So I was his linguistic and cultural advisor in Iraq and helped him negotiate meetings with Iraqi officials and the local police and military officials. And then of course, you already mentioned so I also served in some embassies overseas as military sales advisors. So we helped foreign countries sort of determine what their threats were and what sort of capabilities they needed to counter those threats, and then get the equipment and training that they needed to effectively counter their threats. My last assignment, of course, was at the Pentagon as the advisor to the chairman of the Joint Staff. I was the Arabian Peninsula Division Chief, so that was the part of the world that I advised the chairman about.
Wow, thank you. Extensive experience. Let me just ask a question before we move to Michelle, which is, when you're in those kind of contexts, when you're doing so much more, like you're not just translating like the cultural, like I just can't imagine. I mean, are you also translating and while also having to give I don't know, clues and tips, like to clue in?
Sure. Well, translating and interpreting was part of the job, although I wasn't a professional interpreter or a professional translator. My job was more in the realm of interpreting the local customs and language nuances, and sort of listening into the conversations to see if what their translator was saying was the same as what the official was saying, or if they were having sidebar conversations. to sort of pay attention to those and get an idea of what was going on in the background of the meeting. Yeah, I tell, so after I retired from the Army, I spent a year at seminary, and then I decided that I had a midlife crisis and left seminary and came to Shekhalimi School District to be the senior Army instructor for the JROTC, Junior ROTC program here. And I tell the cadets all the time that leadership is not just about leading your subordinates, but sometimes you have to lead your peers, or sometimes you have to lead your superiors. And so that was the situation that I found myself in in jobs like the Pentagon or at the Central Command staff, trying to lead the generals into the decisions that I felt were the most beneficial for the United States. And sometimes you win and sometimes you don't, but it's that was the leadership challenge for me. There was not leading soldiers in on the ground. It was trying to lead the generals into the types of decisions that we felt were best for the country.
That is interesting. That's what I was wondering. Wow. I'm glad the cadets are learning from you. I'm sorry, I failed to mention that you are currently an instructor.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I hope they are too.
Thank you. And so, Michelle, can you give us some snapshots of what it was like flying and what you flew and what that was like for you?
Sure. Thank you for having me back again. And thank both Mona and Rich for your service as well. Listening to Mona and Rich, I don't know that I deserve to be on this little snapshot with all of you. You guys have done amazing things for far longer than I powered through it. I did my
don't minimize what you did.
So I did fly. I flew the OH-58D and I flew the UH-1, so the Kiowa Warrior and the Huey. For those of you that don't know, the Kiowa Warrior is the little one with the ball on top. It's been phased out. It was supposed to be a transition from the Apache to Comanche. The Apache's still in, the 58D's gone, and the Comanche's been scrapped. So a lot of changes in the aviation world. But yeah, 8 years. I actually asked to go overseas, and I got Fort Hood, which is dead center of the country, Texas. And then I did a tour at the National Training Center. So I flew the enemy helicopter for training purposes. So it was actually the mocked up helicopter. It's kind of cool looking. It was supposed to look like the Soviet Hind D was the idea. But again, listening to Mona and Rich, I mean, I had it pretty easy. I got to fly. The flying part was pretty awesome. We don't need to beat a dead horse. I know I talked about it last year. I personally faced a lot of misogyny that I was not ready for. I grew up in California. I was in Civil Air Patrol. I went as high as you can go in Civil Air Patrol, and I was in college, and everything I had ever done was based on my performance. And I had never been directly had anything based on my gender. It was a very strange experience for me, and more disappointing than I was ready for. Like, I really thought I could handle it. I thought I was pretty hardcore. My goal when I went in, I wanted to be the first female 160th pilot, which is the special ops for the Army helicopters. And actually, so this is interesting. My initial goal before I ever got in the service was to be the solo pilot for the Thunderbirds, the first female Thunderbird solo pilot.
Wow.
And now, how many years after I've gotten out? It's been 20 years since I've gotten out. Not when I went in, 28 years ago when I went in. And they just now are getting females in the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds in the performance. They have them in the carrier positions, but in the performance, aircraft that are out doing the air shows just now. So 28 years after I joined with that goal, it's just happening. So I think it's maybe not just me that had that. I was in the air cav, which when I joined was kind of the last holdout of the old boys club, other than the 160th, which was all men. And I was told fairly rapidly that I shouldn't be there. I didn't deserve to be there. That, I don't know. I never had to use any of my female anatomy to fly a helicopter, so I'm not sure why that was so important to a lot of the men. Unfortunately, it was. I'm not saying Army-wide isn't like that. I have plenty of friends that are in the service, in the Army, in the Marines, that don't have those experiences. My daughter, by the way, just graduated from Air Force basic training, so proud mommy moment. So she's going to be a C5 crew chief. So, and I did encourage that. And I do think different services and different jobs within each service have a different level. Unfortunately, again, 20 years ago for me, it was not what I wanted it to be. And it was more difficult than I thought it was going to be. I thought I could power through it, and I couldn't, unfortunately. So I only did 8 years. So, and I did not serve in the Pentagon.
Well, before we go back to Mona, I just want to refer to your the expression you used. You don't want to beat a dead horse. It's definitely not. It's definitely not dead. Unfortunately.
That is sad.
Yeah. And it's really important that we hear this and that you share this.
I wish I could say I was isolated. Unfortunately, I know I'm not. And I also don't want to make it sound like it's service-wide, because I don't think that's the case either. I think there are isolated incidences and isolated units in which it continues to be an issue. But
well, thank you for that. And congratulations to your daughter.
Thank you.
So, Mona, you shared that you have experiences from being in different positions, from family to patient to.
Can I just talk a little bit about my military career? And I also want to address what Michelle said, because it does happen in areas, and I faced it as well as a female in the service, when 70 to 85% or 90% is masculine in the fields that we're in. And there are times when there is either overt or covert discrimination for women, and it's a little bit harder. We're breaking more and more glass ceilings, and unfortunately, I think that still does happen. And I know it happened to me at the Pentagon, where I had one 3-star general who was great and really put women forward. And there were a lot of women in different leadership positions. And then the next 3-star that followed him, in his first 3 months, fired 4 senior women, only women. And, I was one of the ones that pushed back, and it was really nasty, and it was hard. And it was a really difficult time in my career. And so I can appreciate what you went through. And I know what I went through, and I really had to fight it. And it didn't end up being a career ender for me, but, and it didn't end up being a career ender for him, but it could have been on either way. So I think that the more courage that we have to stand up, and more women going in, and hopefully more for your daughter, that will have more equanimity amongst the ranks, and all genders, and the diverse genders that now exist, which is wonderful that we're even allowing for that. I do want to say, I've really been very blessed with a lot of different careers in the military, or a lot of different positions that give you a point of view. So I went in as a nurse. I went in with my master's degree. I came in as a captain, and I just felt so fortunate. I created the first, as part of the creation of the first critical care transport teams. I worked in the ICUs, the surgical ICUs, was a critical care educator out of the box. and then flew 3 different flying units. And I came in active duty and then went reserve. And then in my active time, I really had this opportunity to learn the system at different levels. But in my reserve time, I had a parallel career in academia where I taught at 5 or 6 different universities along with my military career. And in my military career, I was able to continue flying. I did missions all over the world and was able to deploy to several different places at that time, to Haiti as presidential support for President Clinton at the time. Also with several times to Tunisia. I went when we did international medical training, really trying to create regional networks to respond to emergencies. Mm-hmm. And that was part of the international health system that I did that. And then the flying assignments deploying to Bosnia and Kosovo in those areas, and really living on the front lines and in the sandbox, so to speak, and seeing all the different kinds of evacuations that we would do. And then with 9/11 being reactivated to full-time and working on how we brought in patients from the front and seeing the types of wounds and the different things that happen for our sailors, soldiers, airmen, Marines, all of them. I'll just say soldiers to be consistent, but we're under all different services. And even with 9/11 being on one of the standby crews, unfortunately, there wasn't people to rescue at that point. But feeling very blessed that I had those opportunities, and then worked as an inspector general with the Air Force Inspection Agency, really being able to look enterprise-wide at what we did and how we could make it better. And then taking command of a squadron, which really is like running your own hospital. It's sort of crazy, but it works. And it's really an amazing opportunity to help we were a standalone reserve unit, so we didn't have support from active duty, and really having our own little, not quite a hospital, but clinic, where we had all the different pieces to keep everybody healthy on base and medically ready to deploy, which is part of our national security and us being nationally ready to go. And then being very fortunate to go to National Defense University, and then taking those positions I mentioned at the Pentagon and with the secretary to really take a look from the top and actually create policy that made it into the NDAA and was funded. So just getting through those wickets was quite the learning experience. And having that along with the academic career, because I was active and then reserve, and then my last 2 tours at the Pentagon were active, I was able to pull that together and create these degree programs for nurses and other healthcare professionals to learn how to care for our service members and our veterans, and see what are the specific service-connected conditions and maybe what's unique to them. And we have the largest healthcare system in the country between the VA and the military. That's 30 million people that we can serve, potentially 30 million beneficiaries, including some of our families. And we spend over $200 billion a year in our budget out of our taxpayer dollars on the system that's very important, and it really works very well. But it can always get better. But change is literally an act of Congress. So a lot of people don't know how to do that. And Congress wasn't really set up to run a healthcare system, especially not a very large healthcare system. So it helps to kind of learn the systems, really understand the conditions. And to date, I think in the education, I've kind of estimated we've touched over 500,000 veterans, maybe more, maybe up to 1 million, in terms of being able to provide better care. And I say veterans, including active duty and reserve components, all of our service members having served. And I'm very thankful to both of you for your service, Bahia for supporting our service members and our veterans, and to those of you who want to take care of them and welcome them back into your communities, because it is a really hard transition. And a lot of people don't have that understanding of what it's like to serve and sacrifice and being willing to lay down your life for the person next to you that you don't even know. But having that level of altruism and egolessness and compassion for the other, because no one wants peace more than the person that goes to war and sees it firsthand. So everybody in the community to try to understand our veterans and support them. All right. I had to talk for a long time, so I'm going to give somebody else a chance.
Oh, no, every word is valuable. Thank you so much. Well, I wanted to go back to you, Rich, and before and ask the next question, um, which is I wanted to ask each of you about what your personal, whatever you want to share, your transition back was like after you returned from service. But I wanted to first give Rich a chance to respond, because I know last time you responded when Michelle was sharing about the misogyny, and I know as an instructor you're doing things about that. But you also just I know you probably want a chance to express something.
Right. Well, thank you, Michelle and Mona, for your service. And I know, I mean, I think everybody is aware that these things that shouldn't happen do sometimes, and it's unfortunate. Hopefully, hopefully I was never a part of that. Hopefully I was a part of the movement to rectify that. And I hope that today I still am. About 1/3 of the 77 cadets that I train and teach are female cadets. And, right now, our executive officer, the second in command, is a female cadet, a senior, and in fact, next semester she's going to be our battalion commander. So, I think that the other instructors and I look for the best qualified individual to lead the battalion, and hopefully we can sort of blind ourselves to the things that don't play into that, like gender and religion and other factors. So it was certainly try my best to be a good person, and I hope I succeed most of the time. But I mean, I'm not sure what to say or how to respond, because while I know that it happens, I didn't experience it myself, so I don't. I can imagine how it feels, but I can't know how it feels. But I know it must be frustrating, because I know I would be frustrated if the same thing happened to me. So, but in terms of coming back, what my retirement, I say re-entry, I guess my entire adult life I was in the Army. So my entry into the civilian life was not that hard, aside from the fact that I felt a calling to go to seminary, and then realigned myself a year into that. But I don't think that's terribly traumatic or unusual. Coming home from combat, from Iraq, was a strange experience. I know we got on a plane and we came home. We really didn't know exactly what was going to happen when we got back. We were just glad to be coming home. But we landed in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and they said, "Okay, everybody out of the plane." They put us on a bus and they took us to a barracks, and they said, "You're going to hang out here for a while." And a while turned out to be like 2 weeks. And we weren't allowed to leave the barracks. I guess, some people had, the Army experienced, or the military realized that some people came back from combat and were not well adjusted enough to re-enter society. Mm-hmm. So as sort of just a knee-jerk reaction, until they could figure out a better plan, their plan was to sort of put everybody in isolation for a couple of weeks and sort of keep an eye on us and see if we acted weird or not. But during that time, there were a few things that happened. We brought the remains of the soldiers who didn't survive back, and had a memorial service, a funeral for them. And of course, in a military funeral, a part of the honors is the 21 gun rifle salute, 20 rifle salute, so 21 volleys. And I was shocked that I didn't feel like I had PTSD. I've never been diagnosed with PTSD. I don't feel that way today, but I remember those rifles going off and just being startled, like beyond a normal degree. I urged to like jump under the pew in front of me, So that was my first indication that there was something going on. And over time it subsided, but for a while, loud noises, sudden noises would startle me. And there wasn't really, like, no doctor or nobody really, sort of debriefed us and told us that these are some things you might expect. I think they were just sort of, PTSD was just sort of becoming a common phrase, I think, around that time. When we got back, we did all have to meet with I'm not a medical professional. I think it was a psychologist who asked us some questions. And the questions seemed sort of odd to me, like, over the past year or 15 months, have you thought about death? Like, well, yeah, but pretty much every day, all day. Have you thought about what life would be like if you were dead, or the questions like that, the questions you would ask somebody who was maybe contemplating suicide, which maybe was what they were trying to discern. But I remember thinking, well, these questions these aren't the right questions. These aren't the questions that you should be asking me. Because of course I thought about what would happen if I was dead, Yeah. Michelle said that she felt like she was the least qualified member of this panel, but I feel that way too, because aside from serving in the military and being related to Uncle Bobby, I don't really have any expertise in the matter. I know what PTSD is. I know a few people who have it. But just like I can't know for sure what it feels like to be discriminated against as a woman, I also don't know for sure what it feels like to have PTSD because I haven't been diagnosed with it. So if I have it, I don't know. I'm not aware. I don't feel like I have it. But I'm sure that I'm not the same person that I was before the experience. So.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate every word you just said. And I'm someone who can't imagine not having PTSD, post-traumatic stress. If I had been in those situations, I don't know how I think it's just the way the mind has to cope.
My first sergeant insists that every time he goes to the VA hospital, he tells them everybody who's served in combat has PTSD. Like, you should just blanket give them that on their their VA medical disability form. But that's of course not how they do it. You have to demonstrate that the degree of the stress is such that you can't function normally in a job setting, which apparently is not the case for me since I seem to be employed.
Thank you so much. When we come back around with the next question, I would love to hear what you think would have been for you and could be for other people the right questions to ask. I don't know if you have one, off the top of your head.
I'll start thinking.
Okay. Because that's such a good point. I can just imagine sitting there going, why aren't you asking me, X, Y, and Z? So thank you so much.
Certainly.
Michelle, what was the transition like for you?
So because I served between the two Gulf Wars, I didn't deploy. I had a lot of friends that went to Bosnia. So I didn't deploy overseas. I do have some VA stories I can share with you, but I didn't have a transition back, so can't really talk on that.
I know you have concerns about other people, like who you've seen have a tough time. And can you just sort of mention like what you wish was there for them or should be in place that should be provided for them?
Sure. Well, if you want, I can speak on this specific VA experience in a non-PTSD, non-emergency type situation. So I'm 30% disabled, so I get my health care through the VA. And I went in to see mental health provider, and I don't live super close to a base. So I went through the channels and I was given the opportunity to see a mental health provider that was local to me. And it took a little while and some hoop jumping and all that, and it was approved. So I start going. And it took almost 8 months for the VA to start paying, but we kind of got it going. Then the VA transferred from physical checks to direct deposit. But when they did it, they asked for all this tons of paperwork. My therapist is an incredibly intelligent woman who charges $195 an hour and had to hire somebody else. She's like, I've done tons of healthcare insurance and I can't figure this out. Hired somebody else. So it was only costing, $40 an hour to try and unravel this. It has now been 2 years. I personally have spent close to $10,000 out of pocket for care that I was told the VA was going to cover. And we still haven't unraveled it. And every time we call, they go, oh, you didn't talk to the VA. Oh, you have to talk to TRICARE. Oh, you have to talk to the VA. Oh, this number doesn't match. This number doesn't match. And nobody can fix it. And I tell you this story because I'm not suicidal. I'm not suffering from painful PTSD. Can you imagine if I was? Like, the stress of this is leading to PTSD, to be quite honest with you. So I have friends. I have a friend who he currently has a GoFundMe site up, who quite nearly completed his mission of taking his own life, and was hospitalized. The VA didn't have a bed for him. He went to another place to get care, and now the VA is saying they aren't going to pay for it. And his is all the way up at the White House for review. But it's really painful and it's horrible. Like, I did everything I was supposed to do. My doctor through the VA approved this. The doctor was my current therapist, was approved, and now nobody can figure out how to get her paid. And nobody seemingly has a boss or somebody in the system who is capable of looking at it and going, oh, let's fix this. So I'm working on the draft to the letter to my congressman because nobody can figure it out. And I don't understand. It's been 2 years. Again, I was approved. She was approved. Money started coming in and then stopped. And again, I can't even fathom how hard this would be if I didn't have funds to pay her, if I had to stop because of this. It's awful. It is awful that somebody who needs mental health care is not getting the care they need. So, and that's, like I said, I'm not even, I would say mine's not important. I mean, it is, but I'm not struggling day to day, right? I can do what I need to do, but there are people that are far worse than me in the same situation, and they don't have the benefits that I am lucky enough to have, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah, it sounds like, and that it totally matters. It's very relevant, and that is so not the way we should be treating anyone's, especially veterans who, you put your life out there and you had to leave a job you love because there wasn't enough support structure while you're in there.
Right.
I'm really sorry that this is ongoing. And
it's frustrating. And like I said, I mean, I'm concerned. This is like I said, my friend, he did 3 deployments. He spent 21 years flying helicopters in the Army, and they're like, oh, that's too bad. You tried to kill yourself. Have a nice day. What? I don't understand how they can be so cavalier, and how everybody can just use the excuse that, oh, TRICARE, oh, Planned Partner, whatever the other names are. They're always like finger pointing, but the left and the right hand can't communicate, and soldiers are falling through massive gaps, and it's really frustrating. I do not believe a man who served 20 some years, several deployments, should be begging on a GoFundMe site to get the mental health care he needs, or any health care he needs for that matter. So.
Again, thank you so much. I just want to turn it over to Mona, because I know that we do want to hear also, Mona, what your transition was like, but I know that I'm sure you have a desire to respond to Michelle's, the dilemma that she's bringing up.
I heart breaks for you, Michelle. I mean, I think you're articulating a problem that a lot of people have, and that there is this gap for a lot of soldiers where they're not getting the care, and it's inexcusable. And I think it's a good idea that you're doing the congressional and writing to your congressman. They do have a say in this. That's why they're running this healthcare system that they're really not running. So good job there. You can also work with the VSOs, sometimes the veteran service organizations. They are really awesome, and they can also increase, especially now with the PACT Act, the level of your disability rating. And that's for anybody out there. There's going to be a lot of calls out to veterans, and talk about your experiences. A lot of times you may minimize what it is that you've gone through, but you've gone through a lot. And really anybody who's been in the service, like Rich was saying, they've been exposed. I mean, because you have been 24/7, 365 obligated for service. It's not like an 9 to 5 job. You are there 24/7, 365 until the job is done, year after year after year after year. And the stress of that, you're under also a different judicial system with the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice. So it is stressful. It's stressful to be in the military, whether or not you deploy. And even just in training. Training is almost like a mini deployment sometimes. And we have just as many training accidents sometimes as we do in deployment in terms of friendly fire. So people are entitled to the care. And so, I'd say continue to reach out. Also at the VA, they are working on their processes. I mean, I have a lot of friends there, and I know they're trying to make a difference, and it's not perfect yet, and that people really are falling through. But look for care coordinators and case managers, and ask for those kinds of people that can help navigate the system. Because even myself, coming out of the military with 3 cancers and having a PhD and being in the medical field, I still had a hard time getting my healthcare together. And it took years to really do the follow-up. And so I get it. It's not easy. And I knew the system. I mean, like, I knew the system, and it was still hard. So keep being your own advocate, and keep at it. It's really important. And you deserve the care. You were entitled to it, and you did a lot. Really don't minimize. People should not minimize their service, because serving it's a significant part of our lives when we serve, and we're really giving something to our country, and we're sacrificing time with our family and in any other kind of career we could have for a very time limited portion of our life that is stressful. And then there's the additional stressors that happen with the occupations that we have in the military. So just a little thing out there. And for those in the community providers really also don't understand our veterans, but 1 in every 10 patients they see out there is a veteran, and 1 in 4 dying patients is a veteran. So we're really throughout the community, and that's not even including the families that are also impacted by service. I know I'm got these figures at the top of my head, but I think about this. I think about how we can make this better. And the other thing that I want to go back to with reintegration, and then I'll get to my reintegration, but just in general, people understanding and trying to have compassion and understanding for our veterans. And sometimes they really don't know what questions to ask, but to just be open and even say, I don't know what to ask you, but I really appreciate what you did. And to come at it with an open heart is helpful. It's interesting that in our country, the PTSD rate is so high, and then a country like Israel that's really small, surrounded by enemies, at war constantly, and almost everybody's in the military, their PTSD rate is much lower in terms of the percentage. And it's really, though, because everybody's in the military, and there's sort of this understanding. I say everybody, sort of in the vernacular, but most people have been in the military or in the reserves. So you don't have this transition of coming back and forth to a community that doesn't understand you or that doesn't have a concept of what you've been through and can't appreciate that sacrifice and what that has been. And I know even in some of my research, I did research with military women who deployed who were mothers and what it was like for them returning and with their children and how the relationships went. And it was really hard for them to be able to share. And even if they wanted to tell their family, they didn't feel like their family would understand. So I just encourage people to share the stories that you can, because, it will help people to understand more and more of what it is that we go through. And my transition, I agree with Rich, the transition coming from a deployment to the real world, so to speak, the real world is very different because you're kind of taken care of in some ways in the military. And when you're in deployment you're like, you've got a mission to do. You're focused on the mission. There's somebody taking care of food and laundry, and like you just send it there and you get food when you can, but you are focused on the mission. And people are saying you're a hero, and you feel good about what you're doing. But then there's also the sad part of people are being blown up, and you're trying to take care of them, but you're there to do what you can do. And a lot of people get very comfortable in the deployed environment and want to go back because it can be very satisfying to do something with a lot of people and doing something greater than the self. But then you come back and you go to the grocery store and there's like 100 different kinds of cereal and you're like, what the heck? This is really a different world than living in a very austere environment. And for me, it was like 10 women in a tent, one room for 5 months. And you can imagine putting 10 women in one room for 5 months, right there in the middle of a snowstorm. So, and who's going to go out and get the oil to heat the tent? So there's a lot of sacrifices people just don't see. And that transition coming back from an austere location and then back into your family where roles have shifted and kids have grown up and they don't recognize you the same. And you have to find your way back, and it's different. And you're going through the moral distress and traumatic issues that you had in that area. And you've changed and they've changed. But sometimes in some ways you maybe changed a little more dramatically because you've been exposed to a whole new world. And so I think it is hard. And I can understand why some people really don't have that wherewithal. Oh my gosh, I see I'm like talking. I got to say one more thing. My transition was not, because I was active, reserve, active. I'd been in and out with the reserve world, and I conceived of this degree program before I left the service. So I came out with a mission that I'm still doing, and we have 6 specialty courses focused on learning the system, a fundamental course on really understanding the psyche, so we can really treat the whole person, and along with that, PTSD, TBI, suicidality, and then the caring for the families, because we're not an island, and really understanding our families, understanding the disability evaluation system is its own course. What are the wounds of war? What is it to stay in, to be medically fit? And what is it to be unfit? And how can we work with that system? And it's based on a law that's 75 years old. And there's still parts of that law that are the same today that they were 75 years ago. So really understanding that law and the legislation is important. And then we have one course on women in war, developed with the humanities, because this is an up and coming, still a minority population that we need to support.
Yeah.
And my mission. I'm sorry.
Thank you. No, minority and marginalized, still way too marginalized population. And I want to give Rich, thank you so much, Mona. There's so much more. I'm going to put all the links and websites you all gave us into the podcast description so people can find those later when they go to download the podcast, because these resources are really important. But I wonder if Rich or Michelle has one last sentence, literally, because we are really out of time, but I just want to let you say a last thought as I have to wrap up.
I'll just say that there are people out there who do truly have PTSD, and the Army, when you're in, they take care of all they tell you when it's time to go get your teeth cleaned. They tell you when to go to get your blood pressure checked. And then you get out and you have to do that stuff for yourself. And there's some stigmas about seeking mental health sometimes. and people don't know how to do it. The system's complicated. Uncle Bobby fell victim to that a long time ago, and it's still happening today. So I think we should write our congressmen and women and try to find a way to make the seeking the help that people need easier to do.
Thank you so much. And Michelle, before you say your last word, I want to just say for listeners who aren't seeing this show, if those who are contemplating suicide can call 988. It's a new hotline number for veterans contemplating suicide. 988. Thank you so much, Ramona. And Michelle, you get the last word, and then I'm just going to say thank you.
My last word is the average numbers are 22 veterans a day. That's 22 too many. Your story's not over. Your story's not over. I got your 6.
Thank you so much. Thank you all very much. Thank you for anyone who served. And please spread the word, 988 hotline number for anyone contemplating suicide. And be sure to tell others about this podcast. You can download it on any platform where you get your podcasts. And thank you to the listeners, viewers, and our sound engineer, DJ, and our producer, Dean. And be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern time, w4cy.com or Talk4 TV. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity this week. Thank you.
Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate